In August of 1863, Scientific American, one of the world's leading scientific journals, published an article. Experts doubt the sun is actually burning coal. Now, I know it sounds almost like a joke now, at least it did to me when I first read it, but the funniest word in that title wasn't coal. To me, it was doubt. You see, really consider what doubt means in this case. Doubt implies that this was a serious conversation among the world's smartest scientists, and they were all wondering if the sun runs on coal. I mean, to be fair to them, they weren't idiots. This is astronomy, 150 years ago? Nuclear fusion hasn't been invented yet. They're looking at this massive thing in the sky, wondering, well, what fuels it? What burns for ages on Earth? It's coal. So space coal, in its own cursed way, is a reasonable guess. Clever, very clever even, but wrong anyways. Now, those scientists are 100 years dead now, but they weren't aliens. They worried about exactly the same things we do, trying to uncover the truth of the universe. But even when we are presented with this seemingly true information and evidence for it, we're not always inclined to accept it. This is Ignaz Semmelweis. Ignaz was a medical doctor in the 1800s, and he noticed something truly extraordinary. He noticed that when doctors washed their hands before delivering a baby, it actually prevented women from dying. Now, at the time, this was a huge issue. It was even dubbed the childbed fever, and even though we wouldn't discover germ theory for a while, it didn't matter. Semmelweis knew that something pivotal had changed when doctors kept their hands clean. So, of course, he compiled his findings, presented it to the medical community. Unfortunately for him, instead of being celebrated, Semmelweis was ridiculed mercilessly, despite having proof of his findings. Eventually, he had a breakdown and died 14 days after being committed to a mental institution. Now, no matter how sad or funny these stories may be, I think they're pretty great. Obviously, because of the shock value of them, catches your attention, but also because they show us how recently we've been living inside these completely incorrect explanations of reality. After all, this creates a problem that is very relevant to modern life. How exactly do you tell the difference between a revolutionary idea or just a beautifully argued mistake? The things humans were absolutely certain about throughout history is basically a museum of embarrassment, and that doesn't only go for collective knowledge. It also impacts individual perception of reality. We might want to talk about this obscure composer who in 1876 wrote to his nephew saying, "I am of no great use to anyone. If I were to vanish off the face of the earth today, it would be no great loss to Russian music." Well, who would think so low of himself, you might ask? Well, that was actually Tchaikovsky, exactly. One of the greatest composers in human history. He composed The Nutcracker, Swan Lake. You all know the guy, yet he doubted himself constantly. Or take this writer, a struggling unknown, who considered himself stupid and hated his work enough that he asked his friend to burn all of his stuff after his death. He died at 40 from tuberculosis with little to no recognition. But luckily, his friend didn't listen to his wishes and got his work published anyways. That man was Franz Kafka, one of the greatest writers of the last century. Yet he always evaluated himself based on what he thought the world found useful. Now, I've only shown you 4 examples here, but these types of stories are everywhere, from your friends, your coworkers, scientists, world leaders even. They're so ubiquitous, yet for a long time, I couldn't exactly figure out what connected all of them. There is some common thread, but couldn't put my finger on it. So I shelved them for a while, kind of let them to marinate in the back of my head. Until one day, I was going to my classes as usual, and one of my professors mentioned a word, epistemology. Now, it sounds fancy, I've heard it somewhere before, but I wasn't exactly sure what it meant. So I asked him, and that was the eureka moment I was looking for. You see, epistemology is a philosophical branch that explores the nature, origin, and limits of human knowledge. also known as theory of knowledge. But the most interesting part of it to me was how exactly do humans determine what is true or what is real? I mean, after all, that's what all of those previous people were trying to do. And turns out we're so bad at this that we even created a fallacy for it. It's called the epistemic fallacy, and it describes when we take the best current picture of reality that we have and treat it as reality itself. Do you see the issue yet? I mean, the astronomers, they were looking at the sun and thought, space coal. The doctors looked at dead mothers, thought, just bad luck. Tchaikovsky thought he's a loss to music. Kafka wanted to burn all of his stuff. In each of these cases, a confident conclusion became a cage of yet to be realized potential. But I know that philosophy sometimes gets this very bad rap of being relatively inaccessible or pretentious, but not unlike to the invisible forces that Ujwal mentioned, I believe just by being aware of this epistemic fallacy is enough to actually start overcoming it. So what exactly happens when someone is aware that they're under this epistemic spell and decides not to kneel to it? Well, sometimes genuinely incredible things. Let me show you two examples where reality really didn't change, but what people thought reality allowed did. You see, in the mid-1900s, doctors were absolutely convinced that running a mile in under 4 minutes was impossible. And they had arguments, physiology, limits, expert consensus, the usual as scientists do. Of course, the fact that no one had done it before also helped. But a medical student at Oxford, Roger Bannister, thought differently. He thought, what does the human body know about the concepts of distance or time? The heart doesn't understand what 4 minutes or 1 mile is. Why should it care about this arbitrary barrier? Then, after years of training, Roger Bannister ran a mile in 3 minutes and 59 seconds. Incredible, but what's even more incredible is what happened after that. Just 46 days later, another student, John Landy, ran the same mile in 3 minutes and 57 seconds. And just 2 weeks after that, the world witnessed the Miracle Mile, where both Bannister and Landy ran under 4 minutes in the same race. Now, what happened there? Of course, human physiology hadn't evolved in 46 days. That would be absurd. But what has changed was even more pivotal. This law of nature stopped being treated as a hard limit, but rather as something that it always has been, just a belief, a perception of reality. And we didn't stop at running. That's how we even conquered physics too. Most of you have heard, of course, of the Wright brothers, right? In the first airplane, but little know what happened before. In October of 1903, the New York Times published an editorial, Flying Machines Which Do Not Fly. There, they argued that birds had millions and millions of years to evolve the ability of flight. Therefore, it would take humans anywhere from 1 to 10 million years, and that the average person's time should rather be spent more productively. What a horrible prediction that was. Just 9 weeks later, in December of the same year, 2 simple bicycle mechanics from Ohio conducted the first powered, heavier-than-air flight in human history. Now, it wasn't glamorous. It was simple. 12 seconds, maybe 120 feet. But it was real. And the message that it carried was even more so. The New York Times were not describing reality. They were describing a model of reality based on what had failed so far. In the eyes of the world, the Wright brothers were wrong, simply. But that's exactly what moved them forward. Now, I know that we're not trying to reinvent human travel or compose the next nutcracker. But so where does this land for the average person, for you and me? Well, right here today, you're sitting with this model in your head about your friends, about your coworkers, your studies maybe. And don't get me wrong, some of that model is very useful, mandatory even. We couldn't function without it. But some of it can just be space coal. And you don't get to know which parts. That's the uncomfortable bit. Not Tchaikovsky, not the Victorian scientists could figure it out. But what you can do is hold your conclusions just a little bit more loosely. Instead of asking, is this even possible, you can start asking, what can I test this week? Because the epistemic fallacy really isn't about history or science, but it's about the story you tell yourself today and every day for the rest of your life about what is available to you. And it might be the most beautiful, well-argued, evidence-based story in the world. Clever, could be very clever even, but it could be wrong anyways.